General Pam Bondi clashing with lawmakers yesterday during a lengthy House Judiciary Committee hearing and offering little new information on the Epstein files, but repeatedly shouting, throwing insults, and deflecting questions.
How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many perpetrators are you even investigating?
Attorney General Pam Bondi sat before the House Judiciary Committee and swore an oath to tell the truth. She looked at the representatives of the American people and claimed there is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. This was not a mistake. This was not a misunderstanding of the law. This was a lie told by the nation's top law enforcement officer. Tonight, we examine the forensic evidence from the Department of Justice's own files that proves the Attorney General lied under oath. Let's play this clip.
First, you showed it. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer the question the way I asked it.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch. Not on our time. No way. And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer.
I'm going to teach you the rules again. You're the Attorney General of the United States. We have rules here.
You're obsessed with him.
You're the Attorney General of the United States.
You're obsessed with Donald Trump. You have Trump derangement syndrome.
On February 11, 2026, Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the House Judiciary Committee for an oversight hearing. During that hearing, she made a definitive statement regarding the contents of the Jeffrey Epstein files and their relation to Donald Trump. She stated that no evidence exists of criminal conduct by the president. That is a lie. It is a lie that is contradicted by the very documents her own department has released to the public. It is a lie that ignores thousands of pages of witness testimony and investigative records currently in her possession. This is an extraordinary disrespect for the rule of law coming from the person assigned to uphold it. Let's play this clip.
Joining us now, someone you just heard in that exchange, ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Congressman, thank you for joining us. We'll get to the substance of the hearing in just a second, but first a quick note on just how this went down, the demeanor, the combativeness of the Attorney General. You know, we were talking earlier this show from people who have been in these hearings time and time again. It just felt like a sort of a sad farce.
Well, it was surreal. I mean, I've been in Congress nearly a decade now, and I have never seen a witness act with such contempt and spectacular disrespect for the rules of a committee, members of Congress, or Congress itself. And it was surreal. I kept thinking about a scene in Carrie from when I was in high school where like forks and spoons and knives start sailing around the room. And it was like that. It was like the Twilight Zone in there.
Yeah, certainly. She came ready to attack and less so to answer questions. So let's turn now to the substance. What were some things in particular that left you perhaps dismayed or disappointed? What are some of the questions you still really want to get answered?
Well, the central problem is whether we were talking about the Epstein file, which was the source of a lot of questions, or the massive violation of civil rights and civil liberties taking place in Minneapolis and across the country, or a number of other areas. She constantly sided with the perpetrators against the victims. And so there were survivors of Epstein's the international child sex trafficking ring in the room yesterday, and a number of my colleagues challenged Bondi to apologize to them for failing to redact their names and releasing and publishing to the world their names, their phone numbers, their addresses, in some cases nude images from them when they were younger. She refused to apologize. She began to attack Ms. Jayapal. She attacked Mr. Nadler. She attacked most of the members of the committee. She arrived with a burn book of insults about members and about their districts that she wanted to lob at everyone. And we were ready for that because we had played the game tapes from her over in the Senate, and we were astonished that she was, rather than answering questions, completely dodging the substance and attacking the members. And so we just said simply to Chairman Jordan, she can do it, but not on our time. We're not going to accept that. Stop the clock, and you can let her filibuster in her way. But I think the whole country got to see what extraordinary disrespect the Attorney General of the United States of America has for the rule of law. We basically have one rule in that committee, and she violated it for the entire day.
I mean, for some reason, this woman let these victims.
The lie was delivered with emphasis. Attorney General Pam Bondi told the House Judiciary Committee there is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. She did not say the evidence was insufficient for a conviction. She did not say the evidence was old. She said there was no evidence. When she was later confronted with the specific contents of the Department of Justice files, she did not retract her statement. She did not offer a clarification. Instead, she doubled down and became combative with the lawmakers asking the questions. She told the committee members, "Don't you ever accuse me of committing a crime." This statement was made by the highest-ranking official at the Department of Justice while testifying under oath. Let's play this clip.
She turned her nose up to them, victims of repeated sexual abuse, even at times when they were children. She refused to even recognize these victims when they stood up and raised their hands. It is truly, for me,
she was confronted with direct.
Yeah.
She was confronted with direct evidence of crimes that we showed her. For example, with Prince Andrew, there was photographic evidence of him perched over a young girl, and she just repeatedly refused to accept the reality of any of the evidence of crimes. There are hundreds or thousands of crimes that are perfectly readily identifiable in all of the information they've put out, and even more in the information, the 3 million documents they're withholding. But she refuses to acknowledge that or recognize it, and that's why I started off by saying she is perpetrating from the Department of Justice a massive cover-up of the Epstein conspiracy and all of these other co-conspirators who are out there. And she was repeatedly asked, are you investigating the other co-conspirators? Have you indicted any of them? And the answer was no. She essentially killed the investigation when they took office in January of 2025. She got the file from the Southern District of New York prosecutors and said, this is over.
Wow. You know, it's just so interesting watching her just repeatedly refused to recognize them, not even saying that she would want to hear from them. They even made it clear they would go back, even given how they've been treated in the past. And again, just nothing, stone-faced from her. She would turn her nose up and look at her notes and look for a new insult to send the next lawmaker. Yeah. But there is a different Pam Bondi I would like to remind our viewers, and maybe Pam, about. In 2014, while running for re-election as Florida Attorney General, Pam Bondi released this TV ad entitled "Human Trafficking." Take a look.
The evidence that proves the Attorney General lied is contained within the Epstein files released by her own Department of Justice. These files show that Donald Trump is referenced over 38,000 times in the documents released so far. This represents only half of the 6 million documents in the department's possession. One specific piece of evidence is a 21-page internal slideshow presentation from the Department of Justice regarding investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. This slideshow contains a direct accusation from a witness who stated that Epstein introduced her to Trump. The witness alleged that Trump forced her head down to his exposed penis and that she bit him in response. She further alleged that Trump then punched her in the head and kicked her out. The Department of Justice records indicate this occurred between 1983 and 1985, when the victim would have been between 13 and 15 years old. Let's play this clip.
Florida ranks third nationally in calls for help for human trafficking, where young women and children are enslaved and abused. I knew we needed all hands on deck. Businesses and hospitals to spot it, our great law enforcement to stop it, and tougher penalties to punish it. We're taking on Medicaid fraud, pill mills, gangs, and more, and I'll fight to put human trafficking monsters where they belong, behind bars.
I don't know where that Pam went, because she's great. I mean, she sounds like she's serious about these perpetrators, these human traffickers. What the heck happened yesterday? Where is she? And what was she doing there, do you think?
I think she was playing to an audience of one. And she was oblivious to or completely indifferent to how the country was experiencing her utterly rude and obnoxious behavior towards Congress and her contemptuous attitude towards the victims, and not just victims of human trafficking who were seated behind her, but also the families of Renee Good, of Alex Preddy, and all the other victims of the federal government violence that have been taking place. I mean, she had not a word of sympathy or interest in any of their cases, and she refused to even defend the fact that, for example, they unleashed an investigation against Renee Good's grieving widow, and she, didn't even bother to defend that. So we're talking about a Department of Justice that is essentially operating like an instrument of revenge for Donald Trump against his enemies, whether it's members of Congress, like a bunch of our colleagues. A grand jury just refused to indict them, but we know that he's gone after James Comey, after Letitia James, after the head of the Federal Reserve Board, after Lisa Cook. And I said yesterday that he orders prosecutions and indictments like pizzas, and Pam Bondi delivers. She just is playing to that audience of one person. She's not interested in listening to the victims of real crimes out in the country. And then what was very galling to people was how she kept trying to take credit for dramatic drops in crime we've seen around the country going back into the Biden administration, and because of state and local governments and law enforcement that she's basically been at war with, as in Minneapolis. But she wanted to take credit for all of the progress the country's been making over the last several years.
Congressman, to follow up on, as you say, the retribution campaign being carried out by this Department of Justice on behest of President Trump, in particular, zeroing in on those 6 lawmakers who simply recorded a video urging military members to follow only lawful orders, reminding them that's their duty. As you say, a grand jury declined to indict them. But talk to us about where this could go next. I mean, we had reporting earlier today that they're still looking at other means to perhaps try to charge those 6 members. And what about other members of Congress? You yourself, obviously the president's not a fan of yours. Is this a fear that you have, that you could be next?
A second witness in the same Department of Justice slideshow remembers Epstein introducing her to Trump. She claims Epstein said, "This is a good one, huh?" And Trump responded, "Yes." This interaction is dated roughly to 1984, when the victim would have been 14 years old. There is also a record from the FBI's National Threat Operations Center. This record details a report from a limo driver who overheard Trump on the phone using the name Jeffrey while making references to abusing some girl. This same driver reported meeting a girl who claimed she had been raped by both Trump and Epstein. Furthermore, an FBI interview transcript from July 2019 shows a witness expressing fear of retaliation when discussing well-known individuals, specifically naming then-President Donald Trump. Let's play this clip.
So we're talking about the Attorney General of the United States of America participating in a plan to target 6 members of Congress, the Article I branch of government, who are military veterans who served our country in uniform as well as in Congress, because they use their First Amendment rights to tell people what the law is, which is that members of the military have not just a right but a duty to disobey a criminal order, an unlawful order. And that's something, by the way, that Pam Bondi herself has stated in the past. Well, we have reached a point of Orwellianism and authoritarianism if people have to be afraid for speaking the truth and exercising their First Amendment rights. And so I think that the country is in an uproar about what's taking place. And we saw yesterday how the Department of Justice is not doing anything to defend anybody's rights or liberties, not doing anything to defend the Bill of Rights, but they basically view themselves as a law firm for one guy and to go after his enemies. Now, the amazing thing is how many grand juries across America are vindicating the vision that the framers of the Constitution had, that the grand jury would be a place where people would get together and use their common sense and stop a tyrannical executive from abusing the rights and liberties of the people. So there were two grand juries that rejected the attempt to indict Letitia James, and there was a jury, and that was in Virginia, and in the District of Columbia, there was a jury just a couple days ago which rejected their attempt to indict Maggie Goodlander and Mark Kelly and a bunch of our other colleagues. And so I think people are exercising every right and every duty we have as citizens to stand up against tyranny.
Ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.
The evidence also includes a missing document that was reportedly removed from the Department of Justice's public release. This document indicated that the underage accuser from the internal slideshow had been interviewed by the FBI at least 4 times. These records do not prove a conviction in a court of law. They do, however, constitute evidence. The existence of these reports and transcripts within the Department of Justice's own files proves that the Attorney General's claim that there is no evidence is a factual falsehood. The behavior of Attorney General Bondi during the hearing demonstrates a prioritization of political protection over legal duty. Witnesses observed her shouting, throwing insults, and deflecting questions instead of providing information on the Epstein files. She arrived at the hearing with a burn book, which was a binder of individualized insults for members of Congress. This suggests the hearing was treated as a political theater rather than an oversight proceeding. The Attorney General appeared to be playing to an audience of one, referring to Donald Trump. The Department of Justice has also exerted control over the release of information. They were ordered by subpoena to turn over 6 million documents, but have only produced 3 million. In the documents that were produced, the department redacted the names of alleged abusers and co-conspirators. Simultaneously, the department failed to redact the names, addresses, and phone numbers of the victims. In some instances, nude images of victims from when they were children were published to the world. This use of redaction power protected the perpetrators while exposing the survivors. Further control was demonstrated in the treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell. After she was subpoenaed to testify before Congress, the Department of Justice moved her from a high-security prison to a minimum security facility in Texas. This move followed a 9-hour meeting between Maxwell and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. The move granted Maxwell access to amenities such as catered meals and a therapy puppy. This exercise of power serves to ensure the cooperation or silence of key witnesses in the Epstein matter. The Department of Justice is also being used to target political opponents. The president has requested prosecutions of individuals like James Comey, Letitia James, Lisa Cook, and Jerome Powell. The department has also targeted members of Congress including Adam Schiff, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Chrissy Houlihan, Jason Crow, Chris Duzio, and Maggie Goodlander. Grand juries have rejected several of these attempts, including 2 separate grand juries in Virginia that refused to indict Letitia James. Another grand jury in the District of Columbia rejected an attempt to indict 6 members of Congress who are veterans. These actions show the department functioning as an instrument of revenge rather than an independent agency of justice. The strongest defense for the Attorney General is the claim that the unreleased documents are merely duplicative and that she is protecting the integrity of ongoing investigations. She has argued that her department is making progress and that she is serious about stopping human trafficking. She has pointed to her past record as the Florida Attorney General, where she ran television ads promising tougher penalties for traffickers. She also claimed credit for drops in crime rates across the country during the hearing. This defense is dismantled by the facts of her current conduct. If the 3 million unreleased documents were truly duplicative, there would be no reason to withhold them from a congressional subpoena. Furthermore, the department has removed historical records, such as a 2019 prosecution memo, which contradicts the claim that they are only withholding duplicates. Her claim of protecting victims is dismantled by the fact that her department published the private information and nude photos of survivors while shielding the names of their abusers. The Attorney General's claim of being a champion for victims is further dismantled by her refusal to meet with the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. Many of these survivors were present in the hearing room. They included Teresa Helm, Jess Michaels, Laura Bloom McGee, Danny Bensky, Liz Stein, Marina Lacerda, and Charlene Lond. Also present were the families of the late Virginia Giuffre and others like Rachel B. and Lisa Phillips. The Attorney General refused to apologize to them for exposing their personal data. She refused to recognize them when they stood up in the room. She essentially killed the investigation into Epstein's co-conspirators when she took office in January 2025. This contradicts her public persona as an advocate for the vulnerable. The primary legal issue here is the crime of making false statements under oath. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 101, it is a federal crime to knowingly and willfully make a materially false statement during an official proceeding, such as a congressional hearing. Perjury occurs when a witness who has taken an oath to tell the truth provides false testimony concerning a material matter. In this case, the question of whether evidence exists against Donald Trump in the Epstein files is a material matter for a committee conducting oversight of the Department of Justice. Another legal concept at play is contempt of Congress. This occurs when an individual obstructs the work of Congress or refuses to comply with a legal subpoena. Withholding 3 million documents that were subpoenaed by the House Judiciary Committee constitutes such an obstruction. The Attorney General's behavior described as a filibuster and a refusal to answer substantive questions also falls under the umbrella of contemptuous behavior toward the legislative branch. The Department of Justice is also subject to 28 CFR Section 600.1. This regulation allows for the appointment of a special counsel when an investigation by the Department of Justice itself would present a conflict of interest. Because the Attorney General is the head of the department, she cannot lead an investigation into her own alleged perjury. This is why members of Congress have requested that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche appoint an outside counsel to investigate the matter. The professional judgment regarding Attorney General Pam Bondi is that she has demonstrated a spectacular disrespect for the rules of Congress and the rule of law. Her conduct during the hearing, screaming, pouting, and insulting members of the committee, is unbecoming of the nation's chief law enforcement officer. She has positioned herself as the president's personal defense counsel rather than the representative of the American people. Her failure to protect the privacy of sexual abuse victims while protecting the identities of their abusers is a dereliction of duty. Her decision to shut down investigations into potential civil rights violations and governmental violence in Minneapolis and elsewhere suggests a bias toward perpetrators of violence. Specifically, she has been accused of siding with the perpetrators against the victims in cases involving the killings of Renee Good, Alex Priddy, Mara Martinez, Keith Porter Jr., and Silvo Villegas Gonzalez. A Department of Justice that operates as an instrument of revenge for a single individual is fundamentally unfit to serve the public interest. The evidence of this professional failure is supported by a stack of legal and institutional authorities. Representative Jamie Raskin, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee and a constitutional law expert, has stated that the Attorney General's performance screams cover-up. He has documented the ways she has ignored the law regarding the release of the Epstein files. Internal Department of Justice officials have also voiced their opposition through their resignations. Danielle Sassoon, the former acting U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, resigned rather than follow a corrupt order to quash an indictment against Mayor Eric Adams as a political favor for Trump. Sassoon is a Federalist Society member who clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. Her top assistant, Hagan Scotton, an Iraq war veteran and clerk for Chief Justice John Roberts, also resigned. He stated that the department would eventually find a fool or a coward to carry out the order, but it would not be him. Furthermore, Eric Spur, a 15-year career prosecutor, was forced out after finding no evidence to justify criminal charges against James Comey and Letitia James. He was replaced by Lindsay Halligan, Trump's personal lawyer, who had zero prosecutorial experience. Federal judges have also criticized the department's integrity. Chief Judge Bowersberg suggested the DOJ presented a fraud on the court. Other judges have found the department's statements to be inexplicably misleading, patently incredible, and so disingenuous that the court has no confidence the government can be trusted to tell the truth. Accountability for these actions must come through established institutional channels. Members of Congress, including Ted Lowe and Dan Goldman, have formally requested the appointment of a special counsel to investigate the Attorney General for perjury. They argue that America cannot have a criminal as its top law enforcement officer. This request was sent to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche on February 20th, 2026. The court system has also provided a measure of accountability by rejecting baseless indictments. grand juries of American citizens have repeatedly stopped what has been described as a tyrannical executive by refusing to return indictments against political targets like Letitia James and various members of Congress. These grand jurors have used common sense to reject the vendetta factory operating out of the Department of Justice. Congress also holds the power of the subpoena and the power of impeachment. While current political numbers may make impeachment difficult, the record of the Attorney General's contempt and her extraordinary disrespect for the rule of law has been formally established in the congressional record. Lawmakers have indicated that if there is a change in the control of Congress after the 2026 elections, they will use subpoena power to require the Attorney General to answer questions she has previously evaded. The procedural consequences for Attorney General Bondi and the Department of Justice are now in motion. The formal request for a special counsel creates a procedural obligation for the Deputy Attorney General to respond. If an investigation is opened, it will focus on the specific elements of perjury under 18 U.S.C. Section 101. This will involve a forensic comparison of Bondi's testimony against the internal documents of the Department of Justice. There are also consequences for the cases handled by the department, because federal judges have found the department's statements to be disingenuous and a fraud on the court. Current and future prosecutions may be challenged based on the government's lack of credibility. Indictments brought by unqualified political appointees, such as those brought by Lindsay Halligan, have already been thrown out by federal judges. The withholding of 3 million documents remains a point of legal contention. The House Judiciary Committee has the procedural grounds to pursue further enforcement of its subpoena in court. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein, whose private information was released by the department, may also have grounds for legal recourse against the Department of Justice for its failure to follow the law regarding redactions. These are the cold procedural realities following the Attorney General's testimony. The Department of Justice is now a department under investigation by the very people it is supposed to serve.